Professor Nicholas Giordano shines a searing spotlight on the factions aligned against President Trump on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, the God Family and Country Television Network, Rose Unplugged Media Network, vachristian.org, the America First Warehouse.com, yournews.com, WeSeeYouMedia.com, OBBM Network TV, and Conservative Television of America. Wherever you go, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. The archive to the show, the 4 years of all the audio and all the video, you can find at radioinfluence.com/category/United Patriots Uprising/. There you'll find around 200 high-profile guests, the likes of Isabel Brown, Monica Crowley, Charlie Kirk, Kira Davis, Miranda Devine, AJ Rice, Brigitte Gabriel, Charles Gasparino, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Stacey Washington, Tom Holman, Dick Morris, Pastor Alan Jackson, Peter Navarro, Judge Janine Pirro, Kevin and Sam Sorbo on separate episodes. That's just a few of the many who have been on the show. So if you go to Radio Influence, you can find the archive of the show. Now, every week, we're going to feature one of the sites that carries the show. And today we're going to feature the Rose Unplugged Media Network, where you'll find the Rose Unplugged podcast. Now, Rose is Rose Tennant, a 20-year veteran of radio and television who's a frequent guest host for Sean Hannity's radio show and other national personalities. Rose is a recognized speaker nationally on topics of interest to women, liberty, and faith. And I am very thankful and very appreciative that Rose Tennant carries the show on her Rose Unplugged Media Network. So you can check it out there. You know, we're trying to figure out what is going on in our country. We're supposed to have the presidency. We have the House and the Senate. So why is President Trump having so much problem? FBI, DOJ, why national security, homeland security, ICE, what is going on? Well, unfortunately, the factions that were always aligned against President Trump still are aligned against President Trump, and they need to be dealt with. Do you know who they are? Well, we're going to find out right here and right now. Are you ready? Well, let's get into it. I truly mean it when I say I never tired of listening to my guests. Distinguished political science professor and political commentator with an extensive background in government, politics, emergency management, and homeland security. His insightful political analysis has been featured in outlets including Fox News, the New York Post, the Federalist, the Washington Times, among others. A guest several times previously on this show, I welcome back the full-time tenured professor at Suffolk Community College here on Long Island and host of the PAS Report, Professor Nicholas Giordano. Professor Giordano, how are you?
I'm doing well, Gary. Always a pleasure to join you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here because we were on a Zoom. And just so people know, we're kind of like an hour and a half apart. So, and we end up seeing each other a few times a year because we'll end up at political events and stuff. Beside, Professor Giordano does a lot of other things in which we get together on Zooms and things like that. And I heard him recently and really blew my mind. So I really want to get into what is going wrong because so many people, as you know, they say, we have the House, we have the Senate, even if the numbers are small, and we have the presidency. What happened to all the stuff, the big beautiful band? Why is this and why is this happening with ICE and why is this happening with this and that and the other thing? And the thing that really got me was when you said the bureaucracy, the fourth branch of government is stronger than the president. Please explain what you meant by that.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. When this country was founded, the founding fathers, both Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, warned about a big, overbearing government. They warned that the direction of government is usually one way. It constantly expands and grows larger and larger. And there comes a point where it begins to abuse its power. And so they tried to put in all these protections, checks and balances, the separation of powers. We have a constitution that is the oldest codified constitution in the entire world, despite America being one of the youngest countries of the world. And our constitution is unique in that it tries to limit government power. However, throughout the course of our history, particularly the last 100 years, we have seen the federal bureaucracy just grow at a rapid clip. And the largest increase of government actually happened under a Republican. Republicans constantly warn about limited government. It was under George W. Bush and an outgrowth of the 9/11 attacks. But what we've seen and witnessed over the course of the last 25 years is the bureaucracy essentially emerge as a fourth branch of government that is independent of the Congress, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. It is accountable to no one. It is unelected bureaucrats that really end up having more power than the president of the United States. And that's the biggest threat that this country faces.
Well, two questions. How did it grow that big under our watchful eyes? And how does it manifest itself and wield its power without being reined in?
Well, there's a faulty premise to the first part of your question. You said under our watchful eyes, but the truth is we weren't all that watchful. And we, as citizens that are supposed to hold this system accountable, that are supposed to apply pressure to the system when it does begin to abuse its power, have really been non-existent. I mean, there's a few of us that have been sounding the alarm bells, but actually it's the people's fault. We are the ones to blame. And again, we'll go back to 9/11, right? So most pieces of legislation take about a year and a half in order to get through Congress, especially if they're controversial pieces of legislation. Most pieces of legislation never end up seeing the light of day or don't get called for a final vote. When it came to the Patriot Act, it passed within a month and a half of the 9/11 attacks. And I could understand why, right? America was in a crisis situation. We were surprised by an event. We felt threatened. We thought more attacks were coming, and we felt we had limited time to respond. But the idea, anyone that opposed the Patriot Act was told they're un-American. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about granting government this power because the Patriot Act is going to target international terrorist organizations. So why would anyone oppose that? Well, as a young college student who was going to get his political science degree, I gave a stark warning then because I was still a conservative then. And I warned that sooner or later, these powers get used against the American people. And we have to tread lightly because what happens when the threat of Al Qaeda no longer exists? When you build out the Department of Homeland Security, when it was approved as a cabinet level position in 2003, you're talking its budget increases tenfold, $200 billion budget. You have all these agencies now housed within the Department of Homeland Security. People, bureaucrats have to justify their jobs. Well, if the Department of Homeland Security comes out and says, well, there's no threats against the American people, well, then people are going to ask, well, why do we need to spend $200 billion a year? Let's cut the funding. So you have to manufacture threats. Now, it wasn't long after the Patriot Act was passed that the powers began to turn against the American people. And we were told the Patriot Act would never target ordinary Americans, but it did. And we first saw it emerge in the NSA, right? The NSA it's called the PRISM program, PRISM program, where it was capturing all the electronic data of every single American. And we're talking phone calls with timestamps. It wasn't capturing the actual phone call, but the numbers that called each other, how long they were on the phone for, your Easy Pass reader, your search queries online, text messages, any type of electronic data would be captured. And this created a major issue. It wasn't just the NSA, though. What did we begin to see in 2010, 2011? Well, we began to see the IRS targeting Tea Party groups. They felt in the IRS, a certain division under Lois Lerner felt that Tea Party groups were engaged in wrongthink, and therefore Tea Party groups should not get nonprofit status. They injected their ideology into the job that they were doing, and they put an ideological litmus test in place to determine who gets nonprofit status and who doesn't. And this is where we started to see the transition from bureaucrats into ideological zealots that are actually pushing a political agenda. And then again, we fast forward a little bit later, 2014. Many Americans don't know this, but the CIA under John Brennan was caught spying on sitting members of the United States Senate and the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, because the Senate Intelligence Committee was investigating the CIA. So the CIA was capturing senators and their staff members' communications to monitor what they were talking about. Now, this is astounding to me, because you are talking about the most important part of our government. Out of the three branches, the legislative branch is the most important part. It's why it has 10 sections in the Constitution. That's longer than any of the other articles in our Constitution. It's why the legislative branch has the most checks and balances within the system. And the legislative branch actually has oversight over the executive branch and judicial branch. It has oversight over the bureaucracy. So now you have the CIA being caught red-handed spying on sitting members of the United States Senate. And what happened? Well, nothing. There was a little bit of outrage by senators for about a week or two. It made a couple of headlines, and that was it. Not a single person was suspended. Not a single person was fired. Not a single person was arrested, even though this was highly illegal, what they were doing. Now, think about that logically. You have the Senate, the ones with the power of oversight over the CIA, and they didn't do anything to punish the CIA for this gross abuse of power. And then it went a step further. So if you see the severity of the incidents continue to increase as we go down the line. So let's look at 2016. You have President Trump, at the time, candidate Trump, announcing he's going to run for the president of the United States. And what do we see? Well, we see the CIA, the FBI, Democrats, the media, all collude over Russian collusion. That Donald Trump is simply a plant of Vladimir Putin. He is pushing Putin's agenda here in the United States. He's almost serving as a foreign agent. And so we must target his campaign. We must come up with a fake story to begin this investigation. And so they launched the investigation. And then President Trump wins. And I think this is when I finally made up my mind that the bureaucracy has taken full control and emerged as the fourth branch of government. In January of 2017, I believe it was, you had a Senate Minority Leader at the time, Chuck Schumer, appear on Rachel Maddow, MSNBC. And Rachel Maddow asked him, you have President Trump that's really attacking the intelligence community. He's going after them hard. He's calling them all sorts of names. What advice would you give to President Trump? And Senator Schumer said something really revealing. He said, I would tell him what he's doing is really stupid. And this is almost a verbatim quote. It's really dumb because the intelligence community has 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Now, this wasn't Senator Schumer threatening Donald Trump. This was Senator Schumer, who I am not a fan of, actually warning Donald Trump of the power of the intelligence community. And Rachel Maddow started laughing at that, but it wasn't funny. Instead, she should have been horrified, and she should have asked, you, as the most powerful Democrat in the United States Senate, as one of the most powerful members of the United States Senate, you're the ones with the power of oversight. Why are you saying that a president should fear the intelligence community that he is supposed to be in charge of, that he is supposed to represent? But she didn't. She left it away. So it was really revealing. And we all saw what happened with the Russian collusion hoax. It all turned out to be BS. Again, nobody prosecuted, nobody charged. No, a couple people were fired, and that's it. but it continues to get worse. We now learn that the FBI violated FISA warrants over 250,000 times. They lied to the federal court system in order to obtain a FISA warrant. We know that on several occasions over the course of the last few years, the FBI has illegally accessed the NSA repository on Americans. They're not allowed to do that, yet they did it anyway. And even when the federal courts came out and lambasted the FBI turned around and said, we don't care. We're still going to do it, essentially. You had the United States Postal Service. Think about this, right? The Postal Service, to delivering our mail. They had a program called ICOP that was monitoring social media, and they would flag posts for the Department of Homeland Security, posts that would talk about protesting, posts that would criticize government. And then we all saw what happened during the coronavirus, right? I mean, we all saw that with the coronavirus, the bureaucracy essentially took control. You had governors, the chief executives of states, with their handful of advisors, with the handful of experts, quote unquote, in the federal bureaucracy, dictating that we need to shut everything down, that everyone needs to be masked up, that everyone needs to get vaccinated or else they're going to lose their livelihoods, that schools should be closed. And most people went along with it. Most people actually supported these things. In fact, some of them said that we should continue these measures a lot longer than we really should have. So it shows you how willing the people are to grant government more power whenever there's a crisis. But again, we were warned about that. Benjamin Franklin, those that are willing to trade their liberty for more security deserve neither. Now, we look at it in retrospect from 2025 back, and it was very easy to see the pathway laid out. And again, there is little to no accountability, even with Trump in office now, even with Kash Patel as head of the FBI, Dan Bongino, deputy director of the FBI, Pam Bondi as the attorney general of the United States. And if you really want to know how this bureaucracy, how powerful it really is, look at what happened to Pam Bondi. She announced that she's releasing the Epstein files. They gave her a file that was already public, and she didn't go through it. She should have went through it. It's a shame on her. I mean, she's at fault. She should have looked at it and said, this has already been released, and there's no way that this is just it. I want all the files, but she didn't do that. Now, what was the intent? The intent was to discredit her. The intent was to shame her, because the bureaucracy can chew someone up and spit them out. They could destroy reputations, and they wanted to embarrass her going forward so that people wouldn't take her seriously. And that's exactly what happened. She fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And so you see how powerful this bureaucracy is, that it could set leadership up for failure if it chooses to.
I let you just spell it out from A to Z, and I'm glad you got it all in, because that gives us
there was a lot more that I left out.
I know, but because I know you don't have all day, but that gave us a really, really good timeline of what has happened. And both of us know a lot of people. I've been blessed to have been doing this show for 4 years. So I know I have friends, and many have been on the show that come on like you, former FBI, CIA agent. Tom Holman's been on 4 times. I've been with Tom in South Carolina 3 times. And out here, a lot of people I know and people that I can call. You have your sources, and we all understand and always understood, at least for the last 5 years for me, what is really going on. And what still amazes me, listening to Kash Patel and Bongino yesterday on Maria Bartiromo's show, is when people walk into their jobs and get surprised by what they find within their own departments. We all know this. Why do they keep getting surprised? Trump didn't know when he went in, and he knows now, but why do they keep getting surprised when the people that are supposed to be on their side, they find out, gee, like as Ed Martin said, you have a meeting and it's leaked within 11 minutes or something like that.
Well, I don't think that they should be surprised. I mean, let's be honest. You look at someone like Director Kash Patel. He's an extremely smart guy. He wrote a whole book about the corruption of the swamp. He is someone that actually uncovered how the Russian collusion was an absolute hoax, how there was no basis for the investigation in the first place, and how people within power abused their power. And that's why it's disappointing. He's making some reforms and he's got a tough job ahead of him. But at the same time, I don't think that the reforms are going fast enough. And I understand the idea that you need to investigate and look at every aspect and see what's really going on in agencies. But take something like Russian collusion. President Trump declassified all the Russian collusion documents before he left office in 2020. That information could be put out today. There's no investigation. Just release it to the public. Let the public see exactly what took place. And yet it still hasn't been fully released. When we look at the Epstein files, we still haven't seen the Epstein files. When we see the whistleblowers, January 6th, absolutely. I mean, we still know nothing about the pipe bomber, and they haven't released any details on January 6th. We don't know any of the real details, surrounding what's the talk about the whistleblowers. So you had several FBI agents, including Garrett O'Boyle, that blew the whistle on the abuses of power that were taking place. Well, he's been on suspension almost 1,000 days. And the reason that they keep him on suspension and strip him of his security clearance is so that he can't go work for anyone. Now, that is extremely punitive. The reason that they do that is because let's destroy his livelihood and send a message to all the other FBI agents that if you come out and you blow the whistle on us, there's going to be retribution. So here he is approaching 1,000 days, and they still haven't said, you know what, this was a travesty. We're going to reinstate him. He deserves his back pay. That's something that doesn't need to be investigated. They could do that with the stroke of a pen. And it's things like that that make me pessimistic. I'm optimistic in one respect because it's Trump, it's Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, but I'm also pessimistic because I know how powerful the bureaucracy is. And if you look at it, understand this. A lot of people constantly bring up Republican or Democrat, but here's the thing. Republicans like power too. And Republicans don't want to give up that power when they're the ones that are in charge. And that's my concern, because instead of saying we need to reform the system and maybe gut some of these agencies and departments so that the American people don't have to worry about their liberties being infringed upon, instead of doing that, they're saying, well, give us the power. We're responsible and we'll wield it responsibly. But they never think, well, what happens when Democrats come back in? And that's why it's incumbent on Congress to begin to take up these measures, because they're the ones that could put in permanent fixes through legislation. Anything that the Trump administration begins to change is great. And I applaud any reforms that are happening. I mean, out of everyone in this administration, it's actually a Democrat in Tulsi Gabbard that is leading the charge against reform, that's firing those that abuse their power, that's declassifying documents to show the American people how power has been abused. But there's an element of Republicans that doesn't want to give up that power. And one of the things, and I know I'm going on, but one of the things that I focused heavily on in my podcast, the PAS Report, one of the things that you and I have spoken about before is the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. This was a document released in June of 2021 that deems any anti-government or anti-authority sentiment could be classified as domestic violent extremism, as domestic terrorism. This was the basis for labeling parents at school board meetings as potential domestic terrorists, traditional Catholics as potential domestic terrorists, veterans as domestic terrorists. Now, the problem with the national strategy is it never defined what anti-government sentiment or anti-authority sentiment is. And that's a big problem. In fact, it goes on and says that if I, Professor Nick Giordano, criticize government policies because of perceived abuses of power, well, it's my perception. The only one that gets to decide whether or not they abuse their power are the ones I'm accusing of abusing their power. Right. And so to me, the first thing when Trump came into office, he should have signed an executive order rescinding the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. But here we are going into June of 2025, 4 years. The document has been in place. And I have no indication that we're going to see that rescinding taking place. And that's what I mean, where Republicans can now say, well, we could use this against our political opponents. And that's the dangerous road.
I hear you. Now, you mentioned Congress, and you mentioned Congress could do a lot of things. And one of the reasons, people, that we have been telling you, and President Trump, he knows this, when you sign an executive order, the next president, if you haven't put that into law, he can just take that pen and just write it right out. Just like Trump signed some, then Biden got rid of them, and now Trump got rid of Biden's. So that's why we need to put these things into law, get these bills passed. But as you have said, Congress needs to grow a spine. You want to unpack that one?
Yes. I mean, first of all, I'm sick and tired of Republicans campaigning on limited government and fiscal responsibility. Yet when they become the majority, they don't do anything about it. In fact, they've reauthorized FISA time and time again, despite all the abuses. Sure, they changed things in a couple of areas and they reformed it slightly. But the abuses of power that we've witnessed within FISA, well, that brings into question the entire program and the entire process, and it should be done away with. That's how much it's been abused. I'd rather take the risk, and that's what you do in free societies. You actually say, I'm willing to take the risk rather than give government the power in order to stop threats that may occur. But when we look at it, when it comes to Congress, what do we see? Right now, we are seeing in a lot of areas that government continues to expand, right? We're seeing in the big, beautiful bill, which I support many parts of, I'm not denying that, but what we're seeing is budget increases for just about every single one of the alphabet agency, whether it's the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security. These are all agencies that have abused their power that should actually have funding cut from them. Limit the amount of money they're getting, because then you limit their operational capabilities, and then you force the FBI to have to prioritize to what's the real threats are as opposed to the manufactured threats that they want to make up. And it's things like that Congress could do. They could start cutting the funding. They could strip some of these agencies of their statutory authority because of the abuses of power. But we're not seeing any real Republicans calling for these types of reforms. And that's where I say Republicans better wake up, because, again, with Trump in office, you may have stopped the bleeding for 4 years of where we were headed. But we saw, if the bureaucracy can go after sitting members of the United States Senate, if the bureaucracy could go against a presidential candidate and then target a president of the United States, if the bureaucracy can cover up the cognitive decline of a president, engage in a conspiracy and cover up the cognitive decline of a president, well, what about us? Imagine what they could do to us. And that's the real threat, because essentially, it's about narratives. And what we've seen over the last 6-7 years, that if you go against the narrative, you'll be silenced, you'll be censored, you'll be marginalized. And that, to me, is unacceptable in American society.
This is shocking things, and since you're in shock mode, let's really shock them. You say we're in the midst of the largest conspiracy in the history of our nation. What is that conspiracy? I think most people have a general idea, but probably goes a lot deeper than we know, right?
Well, I mean, let's think about it. So I think the best way to describe it, and it's not to say that the bureaucracy was involved, we don't have any evidence of that, but we do know that there were 2 assassination attempts on a former president and a presidential candidate of one of the major political parties here in the United States, and ask ourselves, what do we know today that's new compared to when these assassination attempts first happened? And the reality is we know absolutely nothing new. No, and this is shocking to me. Like, shouldn't we have an understanding of what actually took place and who these people really were? You had Thomas Crook. You're telling me, some 20-year-old kid was able to climb on a roof and take several shots at a presidential candidate and a former president of the United States. No real social media footprint, but he had several email accounts that were overseas accounts and encrypted. It's just a bizarre situation They allowed his body to be cremated within a week of the assassination attempt. Like, why not keep him on ice a little bit longer just to figure things out? And then you have the Ryan Ruth guy, who was, by all accounts, a degenerate, someone that was constantly, in trouble. He, in 2001 or 2002, he got caught with an automatic weapon. He was charged with a weapon of mass destruction, never served time in jail. So we see this guy as a degenerate, yet he's able to fly over to the Ukraine, meeting with nefarious people. He's trying to organize, Afghani fighters to go into the Ukraine. I've never seen someone like Ryan Ruth, someone that by all accounts is a degenerate, be able to have all these international connections. It's just bizarre to me. And yet we still know nothing. And so why is this the case? You had President Trump coming out a few weeks ago saying that he would like to know more. He's the president of the United States, and he doesn't even know. So why are these agencies holding back the information? And I'm so sick of hearing, well, we're investigating, and while there's an open investigation, we can't really comment on it. No. We need to know. We have a right to know. We're the American people. We're supposed to be the drivers of this system. We have our elected representatives in Congress who have the power of oversight, the power of subpoena, yet they sit on their hands and do nothing. And it's time that the American people begin to put pressure on members of Congress to do their job, to stand up, do their job, and get answers from these agencies and departments. I'll give you one example of how the FBI works. We had the Boston Marathon bombing. I believe it was about 2012. My year could be slightly off. But the sitting Congress then subpoenaed the FBI to turn over any information they had on the Tsarnaev brothers prior to the Boston Marathon bombing. Well, guess what? The FBI waited out the Congress. They know that Congress chases whatever shiny object is in front of it. And they know that the longer they delay, the more likely Congress will forget about it and not press these agencies to turn over this information. And to this day, the FBI still hasn't turned over all its information it has on the Tsarnaev brother to Congress. That's unacceptable to me.
I hear you. And you said part of the solution, you threw it in there. So now I'd like you to unpack the solution. You said we the people need to realize the power we have and use it.
So there's a couple of things with that. First of all, if we look at elections, understand that when we look at elections, most Americans who are eligible to vote actually don't vote. Okay. If you look at local elections, it's usually between only 10 to 25% of eligible voters actually turn out to vote in local elections. If you look at statewide elections, it's anywhere from 35 to 50%, sometimes a little bit over if it's a governor's race. And if we look at presidential elections, the jackpot, we see it's anywhere between about 46 to 58%, depending on the election year. Well, that to me is pathetic, and it shows the bureaucrats how disengaged the American people are from the political process. If the American people aren't even willing to take 15 minutes out of their day to go and vote, well, obviously, they're not really paying attention to what's going on. They obviously don't know how the system works. They don't know their power within the system. And so they know they could take advantage of the American populace. Also, when we look at the scope of participation in the United States, how many people can participate in the political process? It's 100%. When we look at how the depth of participation, how many people actually do participate in the political process, it's actually extremely low. So what do I mean by that? Well, most Americans have no idea that they could contact a member of Congress. It doesn't even have to be a member of Congress in their district. I mean, you could literally call every single member of Congress and you could tell them what you're displeased about. You could tell them, hey, I want you to fight more to go against the bureaucracy, to rein it in. They've abused their power. They've abused the mandate that you, Congress, gave these agencies and departments. There are some people involved that will go online and they'll sign those form letters, get involved, sign this form letter. We're going to send the letter, these emails over to members of Congress, and you can do it right from the comforts of your own home. I hate to break it to everyone out there. Members of Congress and their staffs don't even look at these emails. All they do is literally click delete. They don't care. They're not paying attention to them because they know there's not going to be any follow-ups. They're just going to get thousands upon thousands upon thousands of more form emails. However, when you call a member of Congress's office, they treat one phone call as 1,000 voters. One phone call. So if people began calling their members of Congress to, either support legislation or oppose legislation or support reining in the bureaucracy, well, members of Congress will listen to that if they're getting bombarded with phone calls. And a good example is 2006. 2006, Republicans and Democrats were talking about comprehensive immigration reform. And a big part of this comprehensive immigration reform was going to be amnesty. The American people were outraged. They started calling their members of Congress. In fact, it got so bad when this bill was being considered that they actually crashed the switchboard of Capitol Hill, meaning the phone lines went down. That's how many people were calling. Well, did the bill ever pass? And the answer is no. So it shows you the power that the American people have when they actively get involved, not passively, like sending a form email that's, that says the same thing that
personal
10,000
letters?
other emails.
What
Writing
about personal letters?
Those absolutely work, because if someone took the time to write a personal letter and pay the postage and send it out to a Congress member's office, that person is going to vote. I mean, a member of Congress knows that person's going to vote. So if the congressional mailboxes are being bombarded, and it doesn't have to be handwritten, it could be typed out and signed with your name, but if their mailboxes are being bombarded, not the virtual mailboxes, the real mailboxes, again, that's something that members of Congress pay attention to, because remember, members of Congress are weasels. They want to keep their job. To them, it's about getting reelected. And so the more active people are, the more they're participating in the political process, the more likely they're going to vote. And those are the people that our men and women in Congress want to cater to, because those are the ones that could take them across the finish line. So there are things that we can do to get involved at the local, state, and federal level. We just haven't exercised these powers in so long. And let's be honest, most Americans were never even taught that our representatives exist for several reasons.
Yeah.
Passing laws is actually the least of their responsibility. The most responsibility they have is representing us in the federal system. If we have a problem with the department or an agency, if we have a problem with getting a government program or, the bureaucratic red tape, we're supposed to call our member of Congress, and their office, Constituent Services, is supposed to call over to the agency that we're having a problem with to try and resolve it. That's why they're called representatives, but we've forgotten that.
I hear you. Professor Nick, you've rocked the house once again, as always. My final question is really not a question. It's something you said that I'd like you to explain to the people, because sometimes you don't know what something is. I had that happen to me when I was in the music business, the manager of Dwayne Kerr, the funky flute man, and he got to play at the Olympics in 96, 2 days after the bomb. The bomb was on Friday. We took the band down there, did an hour concert in the Olympic Village Monday. And it was 2 years later when I finally realized, gee, I was at the Olympics, because I was working. It never registered. So you have said Trump is one in a lifetime. I hope people understand. And for those who may not, you want to wrap that one down?
Yeah, I think that when we look at President Trump, he's a transformative figure. There's little doubt about it. And he's a once in a lifetime type of president. You will not see another person like President Trump. And what I mean by that, I'm talking about someone that's willing to go against the system. I'm talking about someone that's willing to actually rein in the bureaucracy, that's open to new ideas, that doesn't go by the status quo that Republicans and Democrats have been operating under for the last several decades. And that's why the opportune time to act is now. Because if it doesn't happen under this president, well, I will almost guarantee it's never going to happen. We're going to continue to see the bureaucracy expand, that sooner or later, we're going to turn around and look at it, and we may still call ourselves a republic. We may still have democratic principles incorporated into the system, but we're only allowed to exercise the freedoms that our government allows us to. And that's what's going to happen. So, when we look at President Trump, he's a unique individual in American history. And you only have these types of presidents every now and then. And that's why now is the opportunity to actually rein in the bureaucracy, actually limit the government, and stop the expansion of power.
Right about that, and we better get it done, because if they ever get back in power, they're going to try and make us pay, so we never try and do this again. So we
did
better,
it the last 4 years,
yeah.
and so it will just be worse the next time they get in power.
Oh gosh, we can't allow that to happen. Professor Giordano, thanks for coming on. You always throw out so much knowledge. So please tell everybody how they can reach you and anything you'd like to promote.
Sure. Everyone could just go to the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. From there, you could link up with the podcast on any podcast platform that you subscribe to and follow the podcast. I just started releasing the America's Founding series, and where I talk about forgotten patriots that helped give birth to this nation, shape our ideals that aren't talked about in history class. And so it's trying to reignite the American spirit, reignite the passion for liberty and freedom within the United States. And remember what the promise of the United States was, not just here, but also throughout the entire world. So check out the America's Founding series on the PAS Report podcast. I'm sure most people will not be disappointed.
Thank you, and thanks for coming back on. And I always love, as I said, I really mean it. I could listen to you all day, and all night, because you never. And one of the things that I find interesting about you, it's like certain athletes. They say they just play free and easy. You can just see there seems to be no labor in their steps or their stride or their swing or how they go about catching a football or shooting a basketball. You just talks. It seems so effortlessly.
Well, there's always a lot of research that goes into it. So,
all right. So, hey, thanks for coming back again, and God bless you and your family.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
You're welcome. There you have it. Once again, Professor Nicholas Giordano telling it like it is. I want to thank Professor Nicholas Giordano for coming on and shedding some light on the issues President Trump is having, trying to get his policies in order, and trying to get the FBI and the Department of Justice and Homeland Security and ICE and others to be able to go out and just do their jobs. It's amazing that there's so many factions aligned against what President Trump is trying to do, because if you're aligned against MAGA and everything MAGA stands for right now, you are aligning against we the people. Okay, so I'm glad that Professor came back and gave us, an overview of what is going on and what we can do. And there are things we can do. And he told you, you call Congress and you can write Congress, because they take personally when they hear from us directly, for the simple reason, if you write them or call them, they know you're a voter, because you're proving that you care. So thank you, Professor Nick, for who you are, what you do, and keep up the good fight. Well, that's all for now, everyone. So thanks for joining us. This is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.